right. So wanted to first ask you, you have been to Q2 Stadium once, but it was not for a game. Can you tell us what the occasion was and how that came about?
Yeah, I wear many hats, and one of them is I'm the liaison sports innovation and vitality for the Dutch embassy, and I represent the consul general in Miami. And Texas is part of 5 states. Also, we got some of the Caribbean, some of the former colonies, Aruba, Bonaire, Curacao, and the
Hmm.
Bahamas. So when things happen in the not just the sports industry, but when our queen came and visited the United States, including San Fran, but also Austin, Texas, I was there.
So you were there for the
Wonderful,
Queen's tour then?
wonderful, yes, wonderful occasion. And there's some Dutch influences, obviously, with Austin FC. That was just, yeah, perfect occasion for me, not with a crowd to see the stadium that I've heard and seen from afar on TV, the incredible atmosphere that you guys have created there in a short amount of time, which is brilliant. So many great additions in the last 10 years, Austin being probably on top of my list.
So I don't know if you noticed, there was a group of press that were following the Queen around, and I was part of that. So
Great.
basically, they had these kind of stations set up around the field. You were there for that part, right? The kind of tour. Here are the grow lights, and
Yeah.
here's Austin playing against PSV, and then they took us to the Lexus Club and let us hear the Queen's opening remarks, and then they kicked us out right before the dinner started. How was the dinner?
Dinner was first class. Anytime our queen or king will come to the United States, it's a special occasion, and everybody red carpets, which, by the way, I'm accustomed to right now due to Next Goal Wins. I've done red carpets with Michael Fassbender and Taiki Watiti, not just to toot my own horn, but yeah, those are special occasions where people pay attention to detail, including food, obviously. It was delicious.
Emergency podcast. Better did a thing, so we gotta talk about it. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency. Emergency podcast. Shut up, hell yeah, shut up, hell yeah, shut up. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency.
Hey, a hearty hello to you all, and welcome to Emergency Podcast, another Austin FC adventure where we talk about the various emergencies and where we also get to talk to members of not just the Austin FC media multiverse, but the MLS media multiverse as we are doing today. So first of all, wanted to bring in a friendly face that we haven't had around in a little bit, but he is here, he is back, he is working alongside me on Verde All Day stuff. It is Moises Chiullan. How you doing?
Great, man. I'm excited. Verde All Day is out there creating new terms in the
Mhm.
soccer lexicon.
Absolutely.
We are bringing things to football that are adaptations of things that have been there. We're finding our own recipes for them, and part of that is who our special guest is today. Because I'm always glad to be here, and I'm sure that there are people who don't mind hearing me. But this is an especially special occasion for such a new podcast.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we have Thomas Rongen here, and we brought him here in part because several weeks ago, the Thomas Rongen Line was created in part because of me and part because of large part because of friend of the show, Chase Hoffman. Thomas, thank you for gracing us with your presence today. How are you and how is Miami?
Hey, Miami is now the sports capital of the world since Messi arrived,
Hmm.
and that was actually a phrase by LeBron James, who came to one of the games late last year
Hmm.
and said, "I was pretty big in Miami, but the goat he goes has put Miami over the top, which is
Yeah, it's a shame that
pretty
they couldn't
incredible."
play there at the same time, but y'all had your dose of LeBron, and now, of course, you're having your dose of Messi. We will definitely talk about him in a little bit here, but first of all, we just
And
wanted to.
actually some other connections as well outside of an MLS team. F1 is in Miami, F1 is in Austin. There's so many parallels between two cities that in the last 10 years have emerged in a lot of different ways. Austin
Mhm.
always with music, but also technology companies are coming to Texas and in particular Austin, but also Miami be the movie industry, et cetera, et cetera. I think Texas is like the third largest economy in the world or something like that, which is just a state. And the Netherlands goes like 1/8 into the state of Texas. Pretty amazing how you guys have seen growth in a smaller city, and we've seen growth obviously across the board, in particular with Inter Miami and Messi right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we will get our own Messi one day, which is something that we'll certainly kind of talk about a little bit here. So what we're going to do, as we always do, we talk about an emergency, we talk about some sort of little tangent, and then some sort of larger tangent. So there is not really an emergency, except there is a clean sheet in the balance heading into Dallas on Saturday. Austin FC, of course, has a 303-minute scoreless record, 3 straight clean sheets as they go up north to Frisco to face FC Dallas. So first of all, just Thomas, wanted to get your kind of thoughts on Austin this season, as somebody who does broadcast for Inter Miami, somebody who covers the league for CBS. Just wanted your thoughts on where things were this season from your perspective on how Austin is, because I know that people were not necessarily so rosy on Austin's prospects at the start of the season, but maybe that's changing a little bit.
True, obviously. If you look at all the pundits at the start of the season, it was below the playoff line. And let's start maybe with Brett Stu, your goalkeeper.
Yeah.
And by the way, 6 saves, Vancouver at 24 shots. You go on the road, though, against a very good team. You're absolutely right. And a lot of people were talking about, including myself, that Austin was doomed to battle for the bottom spot in the West. But as you said, there's absolute hope after 4 wins and a draw in the last 6 games, and some really legit, promising attacking play. There's only 3 teams, guys, that are outperforming their XG more than Austin. So if you go to a verdict, you go exceeding expectations. And again, defending right now is very solid. Good numbers behind the ball. You rely on veteran center backs. You have Alex Ringbeck as the guy, the ball winner in midfield, and also to protect Pereira and your big boy, Sebastian Drusi. And they're less prone to the self-inflicted wounds we saw in 2023. And again, it all goes to that spine, all the way from your goalkeeper to Rubio, who's worked pretty good as your number 9 and has jived pretty decently with Drew, your main guy. Pieces have fit, and to make this team more consistently dangerous, your center backs are solid, your fullbacks have been good. Yeah, very bullish on Austin after what I've seen so far. It's still a long season, but clearly way better. I'm sure you guys are pretty happy about that.
I was wondering, you mentioned our center backs in particular. One of the things that Austin has become known for, as inevitably every MLS side does, is bringing in veteran players from across the league. And we've got players like Brendan Hines-Ike, Matt Hedges, who've been around for a while, know this league, know a lot of the players that they're going up against. With this new sporting director in Rodolfo Borrell, who has an impressive resume of his own, how do you see this roster rebuild is going about doing something that MLS sides always have to do in bringing in players like Rubio, who you mentioned, and finding a new footing for them in Josh Wolff's system? How do you see, as things are turning around at the moment, what do you think we're realistically looking at in terms of long-term prospects this season?
You're solid. And yes, you're aging in the back, obviously, and that needs to be addressed sooner or later. I think where you guys still could improve, in my opinion, is wing play. Can you guys get some real wingers that are great 1v1? Look at the Galaxy right now, bringing in 2 guys out wide that are just consistently dangerous in 1v1 situations. The great teams in this league have good wingers. That's an area I think you need to address. Now, I've coached 4 MLS teams, and that was quite a while back. But Austin is probably a little bit similar to New England. Prudent spending, not overspending. It's not easy for those clubs, let's say 6 through the rest, that only put some money maybe in 1, maybe 2 DPs or a DP and a half, and then you have to be creative. Then you've got to find, as you said, a Matt Hedges, some experience that is at a lower cost, so to speak, but can still be very functional in MLS. And we see each and every year, be it the Philadelphia Union, be it Cincy, obviously, be it Nashville, although not this year, what stands out is that they do it on a lesser budget, but with good coaching, with a level of athleticism and physicality. And that can win you still a lot of games when you have one or two difference makers, which I think Austin clearly still has. So I think the future is right if you invest in the right players, in particular, as again, out wide from an attacking standpoint. Austin is one of those teams like in New England that I've coached, or even the Mutiny that was league owned, where we didn't have a lot of money and we had to be creative. That used to be in the draft, not as much in the modern MLS game, obviously. Although each and every year there's always surprises that a 4-year college player performs very well in MLS in its first year. But now you got to look at TAM. Now you got to look at experienced American players that can help you, and that might not be guys that have performed necessarily well with other clubs. I was always a great example, and I know Josh Wolff a little bit, coached against him. I'm very close to Greg Berhalter, so is Josh. I've seen him with the national team several times, and now with Austin, obviously. And everybody said he's on the hot seat, and correctly so, maybe. A lot of people got moved away underneath him, be it assistant coaches or technical directors, and I think they're heading in the right direction. And I think anytime a new technical director comes in, eventually he wants to bring his own guy in. Is that Josh Wolff going forward? I hope so. I have a lot of time for Josh, but you never know. But with what they have available right now, in terms of finances, I think they're exceeding this year expectations.
Yeah, I know a lot of it has to do with roster spots. They've had to be creative with where their current contracts are and things like that. But they have some players. You had mentioned Brad Stuver, who, of course, has been here since the inception. And a lot of us in Austin are clamoring for all-star consideration for him this year. So I'm just wondering what you think of him in particular and what you think his chances are. Because I know, obviously, there are other talented goalkeepers in the league. You have one, of course, in Miami with Drake Callender, but certainly in terms of Stuver's numbers and in terms of his performance and with the 3 straight clean sheets, maybe people are paying attention.
Yeah, it's an interesting mix of goalkeepers right now in MLS. You got Zach Steffen that came back, and Zach Steffen 3 years ago was the shoe-in starter for the U.S. national team, and now has to rebuild his career a little bit. You got Drake Callender, that was the number 3, obviously in the last tournament that the U.S. played as well. But Drake is beat up and down, somewhat inconsistent. The Achilles heel of Inter Miami still is their defense a little bit. But then again, if you put 5 or 6 goals up every game, it doesn't really matter. I think he should be a strong consideration in my top 5, maybe even top 3 right now, because he's been pretty darn good using the last game against Vancouver, where he made 2 or 3 big time saves and added 3 other ones that kept his team great goalkeepers. They can win points for you. And he single-handedly in that game clearly won 2 points for Dallas. And great goalkeepers, in my experiences, can win 10 or 12 points throughout the season single-handedly. And that's what Stover is doing right now.
Speaking of goalkeepers, Austin recently loaned out Damian Loss to Louisville, and it feels as this club is growing, it's also building a reputation for not necessarily entirely creating, but really producing goalkeepers that are really solid. And if we've got Brad Stuver on the first string, you got to loan guys out to get them time. I'm rambling my way around to asking about one of my favorite things about the league of late, which is MLS Next Pro, where we're actually seeing the development side of the league in games that are actually getting played, actually getting broadcast. We're getting to see prospects for first teams. Sometimes they're being subbed in for US Open Cup games. They're being brought in when rosters are short, that sort of thing. What's your impression of MLS Next Pro and what kind of a role it is playing in MLS? Since, I mean, you were the league's inaugural head coach of the year, there are a few people who I think have really seen and know from the inside the development of the league as well as you do.
Yeah, thank you. Things have changed. In the first few years, salary cap was under $1 million. The max of any player was $280,000, like Carlos Valderrama and Marco Echeverri earned. And then you had players like Eddie Pope that made $28,000 in his first year. There was no TEM. There was no under 22 initiative. There weren't at that time any academies. And for me, in that first year, with Bruce Arena and with Bob Bradley and with Ziggy Schmidt, we tried to convince those owners that the academies are the way forward, and actually give credit to the Hunt, who really did a great job very early on with the Dallas Academy that produced a lot of great players that now are playing for some of the biggest clubs in the world, Weston McKinney as an example. But I always knew that the domino effect would fall if eventually somebody would sell an American player talent abroad. And all of a sudden, all the owners went, oh my God, we have to invest in the academy. And me being an Ajax product, that's what we've relied on throughout our existence in Amsterdam, cultivating and using our academy and the second team, which is Next Pro, what you're referring to. And just look at Inter Miami. That's where Drake Calendar came through, first and foremost. Cole Jensen is another guy that got his feet wet there. Ian Frey, Noah Allen, yes, they're academy guys, but they got their first significant minutes with Inter Miami too, in competitive games, which is so important. You can train and train, but you need to provide those players in particular, the younger, more talented players, with opportunities in real game situations. And that is really what has happened the last few years. When I watch some of the games here, I've not seen Austin, sorry. I see real progress, be it boat ride, as I said. David Ruiz got his feet wet there as well. Yannick Bright was a collegiate guy and now gets some minutes for Inter Miami on the same field with Messi. So there's great examples for each and every club that this now is working. And if you look at a vertical integration from your under 10s all the way through your first team, I can see things now that we've seen in the bigger soccer countries in the world that in particular produce talented players, be it Spain, France, Portugal, the Netherlands, because there is a structure in place that MLS is using right now and can continue to build on and get better.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a couple quick questions about Inter Miami, because obviously that's the team that you are following on a regular basis. Obviously, yeah, you do have this kind of academy pipeline that's happening, but then obviously with Messi, you have this incredible ability to recruit and bring in players like Julian Gressel in the offseason and Matias Rojas, who was, I think, a pretty interesting case in terms of how he came into a league, but is already starting to pay dividends. So just curious about how you're seeing the team evolve and what, for those who haven't maybe watched a lot of Inter Miami last year or this year, what the evolution's been as Messi's acclimated to the league, and then of course the other pieces that they brought in.
Let's start with the financial revolution. You know,
Yeah.
what is it? Five MLS teams are in the top 20, which was just announced right now, and it's LAFC at 1.15, Inter Miami over $1 billion, the Galaxy, and then New York FC. So that's done in a very short amount of time, and clearly Messi has made that possible. 75,000 in Kansas City, 62,000 in Boston. Charlotte will probably break a record this year. I don't know. I think we've been to Soldier Field. So the impact of Messi, just for Inter Miami, but just for the league, that has been unbelievable. And if you score a, a hat trick and an assist in the case of El Pistolero, and still there's somebody else that wins the player of the week, and it's your teammate, you're going, what the hell? And you're right. To me, the game flipped at being down 1-0 at the half in the last game against, on paper, and also the third place team in the Eastern Conference, the Red Bulls, Matias Rojas, who gets in at halftime, gets a brace and has an assist. And that's how this engine started. So that used to be obviously Farias, who's on a season-ending injury. You needed one more facilitator outside of Busquets in midfield somewhere. Another Iniesta, another Xavi, let's say, that can facilitate for Messi to stay high, and you're able to get Messi involved higher up the pitch. And as I said again, you're still missing potentially 4 starters, starting with Farias, Jordi Alba, who didn't start in this game, Diego Gomez, another Paraguayan international, and Federico Redondo. If everybody's healthy, this is by far the deepest and the best team ever assembled in the history of MLS. And I say, I'm all for it.
Yeah, with Rojas, wasn't he available because his team wasn't paying him, I think is the story that I heard. And then
Correct.
he becomes a free
They
agent
get one of
automatically
free.
because of that.
They got him on a free transfer and obviously had to find an international slot somewhere for a low amount, which they did. Smart business. Tata Martino, Chris Henderson, they know the South American market very well, obviously, both in not just Argentina, where Federico Redondo comes from. The back four, the last 2 games, was 4 Argentines. It's unbelievable. Wagan, Vilas, Freire, and who's the replacement for Jordi Alba? Let's say 4 Argentines. You throw Messi in there. You throw Redondo in there. Become a little bit of a South American flavored team, which we all like because we know South American players have flair. And most of these guys are young guys. Rojas is a known quantity at 28, but you look at Federico Redondo, who's probably going to go with Argentina to the Olympics. You got Diego Gomez that took Paraguay to the Olympics with 5 goals. He could choose between Copa America and the Olympics. Pretty amazing what they've done in a short amount of time and how they've been able to manipulate the system till a certain point. I'm sure everybody outside of Inter Miami is going, huh? How did they get that guy? But I think it's really a win for this league. The attention, every day there is a Inter Miami /Messi /MLS story in the biggest outlets in the world, which gives MLS a lot of credit. Wouldn't surprise me if Messi might win another Ballon d'Or the way he's going.
Yeah, I guess win unless you are a fan of a team going up against a stacked Inter Miami on any given week.
Yeah, but on the other hand, are you guys playing Miami at home this year or not?
No, we're not playing them regular season at all.
Watching probably the best ever in the world and a few other guys like Luis Suarez turning back the clock as well. You can say, oh my God, they are the Globetrotters of soccer, or you can say, hey, let's enjoy the occasion, including players that compete against them and fans that are able to give you 6 or 7 times during a game the wow factor. What Messi at times still does at his age, for me, there's still 5 or 6 moments during the game that he's so brilliant. I have no superlative for what he's done week in, week out when he's healthy.
I've been pretty open about telling friends that you're never going to see me in a Miami jersey, but watching them play is some of the best MLS play that we've gotten to see. Some of the most incredible turnaround results and so on. What do you think the league needs to do to not level the playing field, not make it easier for other teams or something like that, but do you think there are more roster rule changes that could help make room for more? People will say that if I say Messi grade, there's only one Messi, but players of that tier, not just Messi and his pals on this one team. How do we attract more players to this American Soccer League from Europe, from South America? and it's not just the one-off Messi effect?
Yeah, that's a great question, because you can, there's so many different ways to get to Rome. You can skin a cat so many different ways. Right now, the Columbus Crew, that's probably where in the middle of the pack in terms of money spent, maybe towards the lower end. They are first in CONCACAF in terms of rankings. They've beaten Monterrey and Tigres, and I feel they can beat Pachuca as well. So on any given day, Cincinnati, Philly, Seattle, obviously a few years back have proven that we can do that. Can we do it now consistently? Because you always hear the same themes. And by the way, I won a CONCACAF championship that nobody talks about, because in the old days, this was 99, you played a 14 tournament, and the winner of that tournament would go to eventually the FIFA Club World Cup. That got expanded, obviously now group play, et cetera, et cetera. But we were able, in particular with DC United, that won, 3 out of the first 4, including myself in 99, where I basically just kept everybody happy because Bruce Arena and Kevin Payne have put such a wonderful team together. Can we consistently, with more teams, compete in our own region first and foremost? And then only time will tell in the 25 FIFA Club World Cup, where there's 32 teams. I just looked at the list. It's all the big boys from Europe. It's all the big boys from Copa Conmebol, and the big teams from our region as well. If we can get some good results there, it would help. But it's a tough one, because early years, I sat in meetings with owners because they welcomed that initially, the input of coaches. Where do we go, et cetera, et cetera. And we always talked about, if we want to compete with Mexico, this goes back to 1996, guys. It was the timing of the tournament, which was always in our preseason. And then eventually, the lack of depth, quality depth, caught up with us. And you've heard more and more coaches over the years saying, please open up the purses, be more creative where we can bring in teams. So yes, currently some new roster rules will be adopted, which then allows teams to either say, yes, we're going to spend money and bring in some players, or there's going to be teams that still look at Columbus and say, it can be done with a pretty large group of Americans and 1 or 2 exceptional players. And that's the double-edged sword. If everybody is healthy for Inter Miami, maybe only 1 American will start. And now you're talking about the development of American players, because guys that become green card holders don't take up an international slot anymore. And that scares me a little bit. How do we protect the development of American players, in particular when teams might say, hey, the Messi, Suarez, Alba, Busquets, that's the route I want to go as well, which will take roster spots away from talented players that normally would get more playing time. So it's a tough one. It really is.
We did want to ask you about one thing before we let you go today. We have Chris in the Thomas Rongen line. So thinking about coaching, and you were talking about certainly Columbus, and obviously Wilfred Nancy has a lot to do, I think, with Columbus's success. So certainly thinking about coaches and what they can instill in players. And so the line is basically, again, like we talked about, 1.32 points per game. So that is a playoff level kind of performance on the end where you can get into that. And obviously you've seen different permutations of MLS playoffs throughout the years. Starting again, yeah, you had mentioned your first coaching job was with a mutiny in the inaugural league of the season, a team named for a bunch of people rebelling against their leader, which is a curious coaching assignment. First time out.
No, it wasn't. I thought that the mutiny had to do with pirates and stuff like that. Nike that year really came up with the whiz. It was a mutant bat. That's what the logo was. It was a mutant bat. So it had nothing to do with rebellion. It was just crazy. One of the iconic, I think if you go back to 96, There's some
Yeah.
real iconic stuff that I still have that is
I
pretty
remember-
amazing when I look back at it.
Yeah, I remember there was an oral history where I think you had relayed that story, and it was just like mutiny, mutant. There's just a couple of letters they have in common, and you were puzzling about. Was that you that was puzzling about like why there was all of a sudden a mutant bat symbolizing the mutiny?
Yeah, I think I said something like, what the F were they smoking at the Nike headquarters? It was not only just us. There was a few other ones that you would just shake your head. We've come a long way also in doing it right.
Those were glorious times.
They were.
To get
They
back
really
though,
were.
yeah, obviously mutiny and mutant bats are going to get you off tangent, but wanted to get back to the kind of focal question I was trying to come back to was this idea of coaching and what you instill as a coach, especially in a league with MLS where there is this kind of push towards the playoffs that comes September, October. There's a lot of teams that are scrambling for those kind of few remaining spots, and just how you've seen the league evolve and how you've seen that kind of importance of coaching as we progressed from the time where you were active with it to the time we're seeing now. And you have people like, Wilfred Nancy and Josh Wolff, who they have eyes towards CONCACAF Champions League and what that tournament is. But a lot of the measure of success is just, can you get in the playoffs and can you progress through the playoffs?
Yeah, what I've noticed, I was the exception a little bit. In the first few years, people fell back on experienced American coaches, experienced older foreign coaches, and most of them didn't pan out at all. And fast forward to now, they become younger. They are emotionally intelligent, which if I had emotional intelligence, I would have been closer to 2 per game in the Thomas Rongen Line. And I was a little bit old school as well in terms of my upbringing and my influences of mentors. When I became a coach and learned my trade, now they're, as I said again, they're data driven, very smart with numbers, and they understand the XGs, et cetera, that wasn't even part of the equation in the early years or anywhere in the world for that matter, till really 2000. And they are smart. Now, look at Wilfred Nancy, the way he carries himself off the field, the way he talks, the way he's respectful towards his players, the way he's able to have his players buy into something. And I had to do that in my first 2 teams with Carlos Valderrama and Marco Echeverri, very similar to what Tata Martino has to do here. When the ball turns over, Messi doesn't defend. So now you got to have 10 guys that buy into the fact that we have to work a little bit harder, and this guy over there doesn't have to defend. That was Carlos Valderrama. And then you put your neck on the line and say, if we do that, guys, he will produce for us, which Valderrama did the first year. And when Roy Lassiter, that record stood, scored 28 goals because of Mr. Valderrama, similar to Marco Echeverri. As long as these guys produce, you're fine. In my 3rd year with DC, I continued to back Marco Echeverri, and he did not produce, and I lost the locker room. And that was time for Kevin Payne to say, Thomas, I didn't see that coming, quite frankly. But these coaches nowadays, great example, in some big games, there was a violation of Cucho and didn't play, and didn't start. There are rules and regulations that you need to adhere to. And as I said again, the younger coaches have, obviously, Josh Wolff was a very young coach when he first started, when he was Greg Berhalter's. They got a great level of energy. This league is a tough league to navigate. I'm telling you, it takes a lot out of you physically and emotionally. It's very player-centered, whereas I still had old school players like Valderrama, Martin Vasquez, Clay Koyman, Frank Yallop, that were accustomed to the old school approach of a Belichick, for instance, a little bit in your face, a little bit hard. Nowadays, that's a little bit different, obviously. And for me, in '96, I confronted Carlos Valderrama in front of the group after our 2nd game where he didn't play particularly well. And he actually, through an interpreter, stopped me after training and said, We don't do this in South America. Talk to me 1v1, but do not make a fool out of me in front of the group. And for me, it was like, I'm taking on the big boy, so the other guys will respect that. You lose a few South American players. That's why I said the current crop of coaches, that includes Wilfred Nancy, if you look at the backgrounds too, they have at least a 4-year schooling. Some of them have masters in sports science, etc. Have built diligently their careers. And again, there's many young coaches right now in MLS, because it's a young men's game as well, with the exception of the exceptional players like Messi. And coaches have become that way. You look at Philly's success. Jim Curtin has been there pretty much from day one. You look what Cincy is doing right now with the young American coaching staff as well, that I worked with when they were assistant coach to Bruce Arena with the national team, in Pat Noonan and Kenny Arena. Former players like Chris Albright become technical directors. We didn't have that in the early years right now, which is great to see. Look what Ben Olsen is doing in Houston right now. Wonderful that former players of mine have become coaches or technical directors. Be it Dave Sarachan, that went on to Chicago when he was my assistant coach in DC and won a championship in Chicago, for instance. Be it Dennis Hamlet, who's still with the Red Bulls, who played for me in the Wild Leagues, for instance. So we have a really unique combination of experienced guys on some levels within organizations, young and upcoming coaches that are using MLS just like players sometimes as a springboard. Wilfred Nancy will get offers. Let's be real honest.
Yep, I believe that.
And that's the continuation of the evolution. That wasn't like that in the past. It's players, but now coaches also. Jesse Marsh used MLS as a springboard to go. I think we'll see more and more American or former MLS coaches being able to go to Europe in the next 10 years and do well, which Jesse, unfortunately, and Bob Bradley, didn't end that great in the EPL.
One thing that kind of came to mind, Phil teaches on Thursdays, and that often prevents him making it to Austin FC press conferences. And so I've been tangling with Josh, asking him questions that he's very good at transitionally defending against. What do you think, knowing Josh a little bit, we'll ask him stuff, and I've heard people characterize it as it's almost like a European, like almost a German coach kind of reluctance to let people behind the curtain a little bit. He's very focused on each game is a new game, and they don't think about rivalries, and he's friends with all these coaches, and he's very gentlemanly, complimentary of his colleagues, some of whom are former teammates of his, like Ben, who you mentioned. What do you think informs that stance of his as a coach, answering questions of the press? Is it something that he maybe learned a bit of from Berhalter, is left over from his player days? What do you think informs the way that a coach interacts with the media, Josh in particular?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're all shaped by our environment, and Josh had a lot of different levels of input, be it traveling with the U.S. men's national team through other cultures, being abroad. Josh always was, as a player, and also somewhat reserved, had a cheeky kind of humor, very loyal, keeping his cards close to his vest. I don't think that will change. I don't know what question would allow you to get Josh to open up, which I don't really think as well. As a player, he was also that way, and that made him a great player, actually, because you didn't really know what was coming next and what he was doing. He was a good teammate, never caused any problems. I think his stint at 1816 Munich, which is obviously German. He's from Georgia. I'm not saying that's a good one. South Carolina college. He's an interesting cat when it comes to that. I don't think he'll ever open up. He's obsessed with the X's and O's and making his team better and prepping for each and every game, which is also always a great excuse that you don't have to get into a larger dialogue if you can just focus on the next game at hand, which then also allows you not to say something foolish, which I tend to do, or a Bruce Arena tends to do. Politically correct and a good dude, believe me.
It was wonderful having you on here today. I just have one more quick question for you. When are you going to get to Austin to see a game?
That's a great one. I think that might be the only stadium where I haven't seen a game. I've been to the stadium, obviously, during that visit. I would
Right.
love to go because when I watched on TV, the green, the atmosphere, this city has taken to it as well. I might come during, because there's always a lot of Dutch companies and also some DJs that go to the Austin, what is that called? You guys have the big festival.
South by
South by
Southwest?
Southwest?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I hope that South and Southwest, the next time falls in the period where Austin is playing at home, I might make that journey then.
Yeah, that's in March, so that wouldn't be till next season. But so no Leagues Cup appearances, maybe, or anything like that. We got some interesting teams in this neck of the woods this year. So
Yeah, I know I do. But since I said yes to American Samoa again as a technical director for their next World Cup qualifying games, when I do travel now, it's going to be it's going to be towards Hawaii, American Samoa, and New Zealand.
oh wow.
I'm trying to cut my travel as much as I can, knowing that some big trips are coming up.
Yeah, if you do find yourself in Houston for Miami Tigres and want to hop over, certainly that would be a fun thing. But like we were talking about, it hasn't been announced officially yet. But if it's not this year, obviously All-Star games next year. So maybe we'll see her then.
There you go, baby.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate having you on, and appreciate y'all for listening. And we will catch you next week with more Austin FC emergencies. It's a double game week next week. So I think emergencies will definitely unfold as a result of that.
Where's Phil? He usually starts this off.
He's teaching in San Antonio today. Colby, go ahead and start us off.